So you go ahead and start first.
Okay, okay. Dr. Moore, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Minister Brown. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I think we have a very critical subject, and that is melanin, the organizing molecule. And so, before we start, if you would just kind of give us an insight to why it's so important for Black people to understand the melanin, which they carry the greatest deposit of in their bodies, melanin. Uh,
Yeah,
so,
that's a very important question to ask in this day and age where a lot of people are running from themselves. We've had oppression for a long time. We've had slavery that existed for a long time, and under oppression and under slavery, you have self-hate and denial of your existence. And so people have been running from their blackness. But when you speak of blackness, you're talking about pigmentation. And pigmentation is very important for the overall body, not just externally, but internally. So wherever you find melanin as a complex biopolymer, it's functioning to enhance life, protect you. So when you ask for why is it so important, because we could not exist without it in animal products, or in plant products, elements in the human body. So melanin becomes a very essential organizing molecule, as you would like to discuss today.
now, I don't know if you saw it, but Captain Kirk, the oldest man to go into space, is 90, and they were interviewing him when he came back, and they asked him what was his feeling. And he said that when he got in space and looked back, he saw this very beautiful, beautiful blueness, and they all had on blue spaceships. He said, but when I looked up, I didn't see anything but blackness, dirty, ugly, black, dirty, and ugly. Did you see that?
No, I did not see that. I have not paid attention to white people having explorations in the sky when we got all these problems on the planet. But you're saying that's what his response was. No, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, the English language has been weaponized against us. And that's the same thing the dictionary said, that black is ugly, it's dirty, it's inferior, it's nasty. And he repeated the same thing. So that's why it's critical for us to understand our blackness and what
Right.
melanin is. So I'm going to leave the rest of the program to you to talk to our people.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. Well, screen.
Oh, okay. All right. We did have this. Okay, here we go. All right. What did you do before? Because we certainly had it going.
Yeah, I went to my share screen on my side and pushed the button, and we were there. So you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So I wrote a book called Pigment Power, the last book I wrote on melanin. And as we talk about the organizing molecule in Black people and what it means, since we don't appreciate what Black is, and like you just said, in the dictionary, we have all these terms related to how Black is bad. But reality is, if you did not have this pigmentation right now with this global warming and the sun being intensified all over the planet, you're in trouble. So blackness is not just here in our body. You speak about it in the universe. You just talking about this guy named Captain Kirk who went up into space and saw nothing but blackness. So that's that dark matter, which is organizing the stars, organizing the universe. So when we talk about the microcosm and the macrocosm, we got the melanin in our bodies organizing our cellular development. So we must break the chains of mental enslavement where we don't think that black is bad. You've been told for many years that it's bad because that's the easiest way to secure, for the greedy people to secure themselves by having the oppressed people hate themselves.
Yeah.
So most oppressed people were brown people of darker hue. You get them to hate themselves, therefore you can control them. Well, it's now understood that blackness and melanin and pigmentation are essential for life. So we must break those chains of mental enslavement. How do you break the chains? You got to go into that brain. The brain is the most elaborately constructed entity in the universe. So when we speak of the opportunity to say self-development, self-knowledge, enhance yourself, this is where it starts in the brain. You got to believe that first. You know, if someone keeps telling you can't do something, they keep telling you can't do something, you might start believing that. But you can rise to the occasion when you have your brain operating properly. So this is a side, well, on the left side there is a brain that has the two hemispheres, left and right hemisphere. You see that long cut in between, that's called the longitudinal fissure. On the right side there, you have a side section of the brain, it's called a sagittal section. And you see this white stuff in the middle, that's the corpus callosum. Those are tracts. All these wrinkles up here are gyri, plural, gyrus for singular. So deep in the brain stem, we got these melanated cells, and we'll show some. But deep in, just like deep in deep space, you got blackness. Deep in the brain, Dr. Richard King talked about this being the immense nerve tract. Right there, you see a ventricular system, like a little pathway where the chemicals flow. You have this little spot right there in the center of the brain called the pineal gland. So the pineal gland produces some chemicals that relate to controlling your melanin functioning. So deep in is where we can go to say there's some importance of how melanin is functioning and why it's important to Black people. On the top part there, on the top figure, it says Parkinson's disease. So there is a disease where actually neurons actually start to destroy. It's called neurodegeneration. So in the brain, there's a place deep down where I just showed you. Let me go back to that. So deep here in the middle of the brain, midbrain, this is where we're looking at. These cells right here, they're supposed to be dark in a healthy person. That's neuromelanin. Those are dark cells. That's not in the skin. That's not on the outside of the body. That's deep in where I just showed you, the deep inner space. So if these cells lack this melanin, they don't produce dopamine, and then it looks like this up top. So in its absence, you have this physical problem with when you exhibit Parkinson's disease. You got the tremors, you shuffle when you walk. It's hard for a person to initiate a task. So when we talk about the importance, guess what? Without it, you're going to suffer from some severe mental challenges internally. Externally, you think about people who are albinos. The absence of melanin on the outside of the body makes it very difficult for them to manage through the environment. They could get skin cancer very easily. They have to wear glasses because they have no protection in the eye for the melanin to stop the ultraviolet radiation from destroying the retina. You got ear problems because the inner ear melanin is absent. So the absence of melanin creates a dysfunctional organism. Yeah, you okay right there? You're right.
Yeah.
You have any questions on that?
Yeah. Everybody has melanin. Does everybody have the same kind of melanin? Does Black people have a different kind of melanin than
Yes.
white people? I know the absence of melanin will cause albinism, albinos. But also, what happens when you say you lose a lot of the melanin as Africans that, according to Sheikh Anta Diop, that was in the ice regions of the earth where it was cold, ice as thick as 3 miles deep, and yet nature provided the mechanisms for them to take on the environment. Nature shedded the pigmentation, and they became white like Europeans, but that's just the lack of pigment. So, does white people have the same kind of melanin as black people?
Well, you can call the terms the same. For example, the outside part of the skin is called eumelanin for people who have brown, dark pigment. If it was like red, like people with red freckles, that's pheomelanin. And I'll show you, I think, names of those a little later. But what we're talking about is the people who can't tan darkly just don't have enough of the enzymes to break down the melanin. So if you see on this image right here, that like a hand looking image, that's a cell, is the nucleus of the cell. That cell is called a melanocyte. So in the skin, if you compare that between an African, an Asian, and European, the African has more melanin granules, these little black dots you see.
Yes.
Those black dots go up to the top of your skin and give you an even skin tone. If you look at the Asian, there's some melanin granules there. They're kind of, they're pigmented, but not really dark. Then you go to the European, there's some granules there, but they don't have enough melanin in there to make them dark. So they've lost that, as you just said. If you speak of the ice age in that area, in that realm where there's no sun shining, you need to have some way for the vitamin D, for the sun to have an impact on the body. Therefore, they lose the pigmentation the further you go away from the equator. So the same melanin is there, eumelanin, but they can't make it dark like Africans, because genetically speaking, those enzymes have been changed. Therefore, they cannot make it as dark as another person. But you see them on the beaches trying to tan. So there's something there, but not the same amount. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'd like to further ask you a question. Let me cut off this phone. Oh, and see if that will help that feedback. White people, I looked at a cell that had been cut open and pictures was taken of. Now you can't see a cell with the natural eye, so this was with a one of these very powerful magnoscopes showed you what a cell cut open looked like, and it really looked like the universe. And it reminds me of, where we say so is above, so is below. So the cell then takes on a whole universal dynamics to it. And melanin seems to me, I'm just thinking out loud and asking you this question, because it would seem that melanin then has a communication with the universe, or at least it seems to be receptive, like you have an AM channel and an FM channel. An AM channel will get you radio, and you can get stations on an AM, but there are some stations that you can get on FM that you can't get on AM, because FM is a higher frequency. So in terms of melanin deposit, would you say that melanin gives you the ability to pick up frequencies that are coming from the universe that the AM station can't pick up? So our hair and our blackness enables us to be in tune with our oneness with nature, because we are one with nature,
Right.
So I wanted you to kind of explain that. I know I'm not doing a good job.
Right. No, you're asking a good question, because as you're trying to conceptualize what's happening in nature and what we have manipulated, we know that we have a radio, and a radio has FM. FM is for frequency modulation. You have AM, that's for amplitude modulation. So we can say the melanin is almost like receptors, like antennas that can receive that frequency modulation. So you're receiving different kinds of electromagnetic energy that's existing. That's all the frequencies are, electromagnetic energy. So when you speak of are we receptive to it, and does that deal with spirit and nature? You know, I talk about that in Science of Melanin, the material spiritual connection. I mentioned melanin being the conduit, that is the scientific principle that makes the connection between the material and spiritual worlds of existence. And as you're trying to describe this with frequency modulation with like a radio, I mean, you got an antenna, you turn a dial, some stations are better than others in terms of receiving information. So yes, that same kind of dynamic I would express with obviously like conscious waves, spirit waves. We don't talk about that in the whole spectrum of magnetic energy, but conscious waves and spiritual waves also exist. You've also heard the term about, you know, you may not vibe with someone, their vibes are off, the vibrations. So that's pretty much where we're going with that discussion you just presented.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Now, how does that help us navigate our way through this situation that we find ourselves in, where um, we are really at war? I say at war because I said that Captain Kirk, when he went out of space and came back, he described blackness as dirty, ugly, and another word he used, which was indicated that it was ugly and inferior.
Yeah.
Now, we are black, and as I said, our language, or the English language, is a weapon against us. How do we now use this melanin? Say, for an example, when a hurricane comes, the birds and the animals seem to know that it's coming. They pick up something from nature that tells them to go and hide in the place. In the case of birds, they will go into trees that got holes in them and everything. And after the hurricane, you see these birds and everything come out chirping just like there was no hurricane. But yet, the hurricane, in some cases, could be 150 miles an hour, and they survive. So, how do we then pick up the signals from nature to guide us in a time right now when we so need to understand that we are nature and nature talks to us and guides us? And how do we activate a higher consciousness to it? In the Indians, they put this little red dot, at least in the women, which would be our third eye, our pineal gland. So, can you tell us how we can enhance our receptivity of nature? Maybe like the Indians, if it's no more than becoming conscious with our oneness with the universe, and know that we can perceive information directly from the universe on different planes.
Well, let me come back to this slide since you're asking the question about I guess receptivity, talking about the birds and then being able to navigate through the hurricanes or navigate through bad weather. And so deep in that brain, that pineal gland, you know, it establishes biological rhythms. It helps out with circadian rhythms. It keeps a person's clock oriented. So in animals, it also helps them with direction, helps them with being able to guide themselves, or the animals, from place to place. I mean, they're migratory birds. And so even though it has a bird brain, it has the mechanisms that are responsive to the magnetic poles that exist around Earth. So that guides them. Well, there has to be something in the body that responds to that to help the animal to guide. And so for us, we're not as sophisticated, even though our brains are much more, elaborate. But evidently, we can't follow those same kind of migratory paths. So what needs to be done is we need to tune in and not tune out. And as you know, with television, it's telling you a vision, and in that context, people are lost in themselves by not understanding who they are, because someone outside is telling you what dirty, black, dirty, and whatever you said Captain Kirk said. So we need not pay attention to his words. We need to redefine how we see ourselves, and that's why we're here today to talk about redefining ourselves. So melanin at work. Captain Kirk probably looks 100 years old. You probably look way older than you. And here you are looking fresh. Why? Because that melanin on the outside of the skin is like an antioxidant. It protects the body. Here's a melanin at work. You see a cut knee on day 2. It's like a little scab has developed on the top of the knee. And then by day 16, it's like, well, it's pretty much covered up and healed. By the time you get to day 30, you don't even know you had a cut. That's melanin as an organizing molecule, helping to keep the outside of our body safe and secure. So guess what? It's doing the same thing on the inside of the body. So when you asked about the different types of melanin, here's eomelanin and there's pheomelanin. So it says somes, so it's like the area where the actual chemicals are being made. The 2 chemicals that are common from the beginning are tyrosine. Tyrosine comes from your diet, it's amino acid. Without tyrosine, you do not have the precursor molecule to make the rest of the melanin. Not get too complex in this, but you see right here, this pathway on the left makes pheomelanin. This pathway on the right leads to making your darker eomelanin. So if you look at all those chemicals in there, there is the difference as to why some people are lighter or darker than others. The genetics for making those chemicals would be different. The enzymes would be different for those people who are lighter or darker. So there is where your differences would be. But most people have melanin, except for the albinos, really they lack it, and that's why again they're considered albinos. You can't necessarily call white people albinos because they can tan. So again, tyrosine is the precursor molecule that makes your melanin on the outside of your body. But guess what? It also makes your neurotransmitters in your brain. Now that's the pretty deep part that I speak about: dark matters, dark secrets, and also the science of melanin. The fact that the chemicals that are making your skin color are also the same chemicals that make your neurotransmitters in your brain. So tyrosine, as you see there, has a certain shape, and as we get more complex, going down to eomelanin and pheomelanin, the chemical structures get more carbon-like, more puzzle-like, and more complex. So it's a complex biopolymer. When we say biopolymer, meaning that it relates to biology. Polymer, it's like chemistry. It's like plastics. You can make plastic of anything. A pen, a cup, something you may wear, your shoes. So the complex nature of the pheomelanin and the eomelanin on the bottom there, you see how all those structures that are coming into play, those structures become receptive molecules. When we say receptive, here's an example of a large melanin molecule with multiple chemical groups on it, and it can latch on, or chemicals can latch onto your melanin. Cocaine, opiates, we're speaking of drugs, alcohol, methamphetamine, LSD, and you think about pesticides. So not just externally, but internally, your cellular groups are absorbing these chemicals, and therefore some people may have more of a dramatic effect from that particular agent than someone else who may lack melanin. If you look on the right side here, that's that melanocyte we just spoke about earlier. That's like a baobab tree. And if you don't, on my shirt here, I have a baobab tree. I'll show it to you when we come back. But the baobab tree, here we have these branches. Those are called dendrites. Those are called melanin. The melanin granules are up here at top in the skin, but these little melanosomes are where the melanin is generated. It's like a factory. They're generated here. They go to the tips of the dendrites, and then they are like oozed out into the skin, and that's why you have a smooth, even skin tone. This is happening without you even paying attention to it, especially when the sun shines. The sun shines, it like bathes the skin, and these melanin molecules come up and makes it darker. Now, if that's on the right side, a melanocyte, look on the left side. That's a neuron in your brain. It makes you think. They have dendrites also. Looks just like a skin cell. So that, to me, is amazing as a neuroscientist. The skin and the brain also have some of the same chemicals that are made, such as tyrosine, such as adrenocorticotropic stimulating hormone, dealing with stress. So the chemicals that are being produced in the skin are some of the same chemicals produced in the brain, and these cellular groups that make the neurotransmitters or the melanin look very similar. In the brain, or in our bodies, actually, there's something called gap junctions. So for your brief understanding of this, there's something called synapses. Synapses are these little spaces where one neuron talks to another neuron. It's a space, it's a gap, it's a cleft. It's a space where chemicals flow through, like from one side of the river to the other side of the river, for chemicals to have an impact. So here we have where you find a lot of melanated cells, gap junctions. Here's a cell, cell 2, cell 1. These junctions make it easy for chemicals to flow through real fast. That means that's why melanated cells may be working quicker. So think of how your thoughts work at a speed of light. So it's fast communication. There's no separation. It's like constant communication between these two different cells. That's how our brain functions when that happens. And melanin being a dark molecule that absorbs energy, it makes these molecules operate even faster. Here's another way of looking at that for this rapid fire communication. On the left side here is the membrane that contains your insides of your cell. So if you cut this up, it looks like a little cake. You got 2 layers, 1 layer, 2 layers. Inside the layers are these channels where chemicals will flow in and out. Well, that's one channel right there. That's one cell right there. Over here, we have a cellular group on top, a cellular group on the bottom, and here's that gap junction again. It's not offset, it's directly spaced right above one another, so chemicals can flow right in there from cell to cell, and it makes information flow much quicker. So for review, melanin is, well, advantages for melanin function. It serves as an antioxidant. What is an antioxidant? It prevents the deterioration of your cells. It neutralizes your cells so free radicals and bad chemicals don't destroy your cells. Not just really on the outside, but also your DNA. You want to protect your DNA. Number 2, nerve conduction facilitator. We just talked about this with those gap junctions. It makes the nerve impulses flow quicker and faster. Energy transformer. Everywhere you find the melanin inside of your body, it's functioning to transfer energy from one form to another. We can speak of 2 spaces and places easily to understand is the eye and the ear. The eye has a pigmented cell layer in the back that if it's not there, you're virtually blind because it's like reflecting. The blackness on the back of your eye absorbs, so you see. It might be seeing different things than other people who don't have it. In the ear, you have inner ear melanin. The frequency modulation you spoke about earlier. Some people hear different sounds. You sound like a jazz artist, a jazz aficionado. You know John Coltrane used to play this blue note. People trying to find out what is that blue note. Well, he may have had some different ways that his melanin worked in his ear and produced a sound that maybe only certain people could hear. So energy transformer. It's also in places in the body where energy must be transformed. So back to your question about nature. The actual process of transmitting or channeling energy is based on the electromagnetic nature of the body. If you put your finger in your mouth, you put some saliva around it, and put it into an electrical outlet, guess what? You shock yourself because you're full of electricity. So melanin becomes a natural molecule that helps to channel energy. So in technology, there's something called semiconductor technology to make things faster. Like trains can go faster using this technology. So in our bodies, melanin is a natural semiconductor, and it does it at room temperature. It permits direct communication with nature. And all I got to say is you look at a plant, and you see that chlorophyll in that plant, and you water it, you let the sun get it, it just oozes with life. And it's the same thing with human beings. You put that right water in yourself, and you go outside, enjoy the nature, and you let that melanin ooze out. Guess what? You feel much better on a sunny day than a cloudy day. So can melanin fight disease? Oh, people have talked about that. And this is interesting. It's a BBC news report back in 2001. So old school article, but it's interesting how they report that black skin could be better than white skin at protecting against disease, according to an independent biologist. There's your code words again for them not wanting to say if it's real. They say some independent biologist, like he doesn't really know. But we understand that melanin does help out to fight disease. And look at that last paragraph there. However, dark skin also contains large numbers of melanin cells in areas that are hardly ever exposed to sun rays. And I'm mentioning these two right here, such as the throat and nasal passages, because of what's going on with this COVID-19. It's an aerosol that gets where? Into your throat and your nasal passages. Interesting. Must need some more study on that. Even beyond that, the penis. The penis on a male, maybe even the nipples on a female, they're not exposed to the sun, but they're darker than the rest of the body. So melanin has a very important role to play in behavior. Now, when we get to the brain, in brief, you have billions of cells in your brain. Most of them are found there in that cerebellum, and it's kind of interesting. You got 70 billion on the backside of your brain, the cerebellum, about 1 million in that spinal cord, and up in that cerebral cortex, the covering of your brain, you got about 12 to 15 billion. Now, these cells are developing fast when an organism is developing, period. So here you have a fetus at 54 days old. What you see there in orange is primarily the nervous system that's being developed. See that red there in the center and the right side here? That's the heart developing. So very early on, the nervous system is developing first, because now you have cells that need to be guided to other places for the organism to develop properly. So when we speak of organizing molecule, well, here we go. So this is 42 days old. And you see that large area in the front that says pigmented eye. Well, we know on the back of the eye that the eyeball is pigmented, but you know your iris and your pupil are pigmented. So pigment is very important for the eye to see things. So all these, you see this, the expressions, it says the developing nerve endings. And it has, again, the very beginning stages of the brain developing at large pace, fast pace compared to the other locations of the body. So while the baby is developing inside the womb, on the outside of the body, you see a dark splotch, dark line called the lineus nigra from navel down to the vaginal area. Why is that dark line forming when there's a baby developing inside? So the woman is also expressing and releasing hormones as the baby's being developed inside. So if we kind of compare this melanin as a skin hormone, not just as a chemical, not just as a pigment, but a skin hormone, at the level of the hypothalamus, a chemical called POMC talks to the pituitary, release MSH, which talks to the skin to release melanin. Now that's happening at the brain level to the skin. The same thing on the other side. CRF talks to ACTH, talks to cortisol. This is the stress response. So all that is happening in a person's body without you paying attention to it. So what we see here is the visualization of melanin actually doing its thing from the brain to the outside of the body. So there's cellular intelligence in terms of how melanin works. So without it, you would have some, in development, without it, you would have neural tube defects, spinal bifida, the child would not grow up properly. Physically, there'd be some issues. So melanin becomes very important at the very beginning stage of development. So with the egg, mom's cell can silence some genes, and the dad's cells can silence some genes. So as the fetus is developing, which is now a child of both mother and father, the patterns of the genes depend upon what's coming from the parents. And most of these genes are expressed in the brain. So the brain and all that development we just saw very early on is very important. This may be a difficult slide for you to understand, but if you make a cross section between let me show you where this could be. Cross section of the brain around here, top part of the head, and you look at the top part, there's something called the neural crest. These neural crest cells are very important because they migrate to make other types of cells in the body. This tube right here is the area where the spinal cord would be, but right around the development in the very beginning is the neural crest, around the neural tube. Look at some of the places that the neural crest creates, or cells that it creates. It can go to leukocytes. That deals with what's your immune system. It can make stem cells. Stem cells can make melanocyte. That's what gives you your skin tone. Your cells in your skin that make your melanin. Glucocorticoids, I just spoke about that, about stress. The cortisol that's in your adrenal glands, that's dealing with stress. Then you have this FGF2, not sure, but sympathetic progenitor. It means it's helping out with your sympathetic, the autonomic nervous system, that is. NGF, nerve growth factor. So all these cellular groups are coming from that neural crest in the brain. Without that neural crest, without that cranial neural tube functioning properly, your nervous system is not going to function properly. So if you look at the brain and those chemicals I just mentioned, at the level of the hypothalamus, that CRH chemical is released. You can go back to look at that. That stands for corticotropic releasing hormone. Pituitary gland right below, it releases ACTH. See, it goes to the bloodstream, to go to the adrenal glands to release your cortisol. Glucocorticoids help you deal with stress. Well, the same thing is happening, I'm saying, when the body is responding to the brain to make melanin. You got POMC. That's a long word now. POMC stands for pro-opiomelanocortin. It's released from the hypothalamus to talk to the pituitary gland to release your MSH. That's melanocyte stimulating hormone. Goes to your skin, makes your melanin. So without the melanin, there's no electricity, there's no spark, there's no life. So you can't exist without it. So for someone to talk about it being bad, well, that's their issue, not ours. So research now is starting to look at this electricity component. So dark brown melanin pigment, it's been around for a while, but now people are seeing how it can conduct electricity, and people are doing this in the lab now. So Italian scientists have made melanin 1 billion times more conductive, and they're using this with robots. I don't have I'm trying to show you the link right here, but there's a link down here that will show you how they're constructing robots using melanin. So nanotechnology and bioengineering. We have to pay attention to that because people are concerned about the content of chemicals that are put in some of these experimental concoctions. And the nano means billionth. Nanolipids. Lipids is like a consistency of cellular groups that allow it to be entering the body easily. So nanolipids, that's nanotechnology. So you're bioengineering products so that they can now be, I know you don't like this word, but remote controlled. That's right. They have used animal studies to now look at human studies, how they can alter your genetic code using these nanoparticles. I like showing this particular image because this is a 1992 magazine of a black woman on the front cover with a beautiful skin tone, that electric melanin. On the left side of the person, the image, is the DNA molecule. On the right side is a carbon-based molecule looking just like melanin. And then there's the melanin on the farther right. And the person is sitting on a computer chip. So people have understood this for a long time, and now technology is using this potentially not just for us, but also against us. So in summary, know the advantages of melanin functioning. I just spoke to 3 of them for you. That was, again, neutralizer of toxic substances, a energy transformer, and a facilitate nerve conduction. So appreciate your blackness, and without programs like yours, Tapvideo, where you expose people to multiple scholars that deal with our history and our culture, we cannot get there. So we have to appreciate our blackness. Understand the future of nanotechnology and magnetogenetics. This is serious stuff now, because we're talking about if you can use a button to push and make a TV go on and off, or any device like that, think about what could be done to humans when you have nanotechnology placed into your system. That's why people are so concerned about this 5G and what could be potentially happening in years to come. So prepare yourself for spiritual warfare, because we're all dealing with that right now with the way the system is trying to make us have group think. Everybody needs to think the same way. So that's problematic right now, because if you can't think for yourself, you're in trouble. I think it's not illegal yet, but we have to be aware of that scenario. So, Brother Brown, I think I delivered what you asked me to do in a short period of time. We can have a discussion on that.
Yes. What I'd like to do is I'm reading some of the questions that people are asking, and one sister said that divine, how did she put it? Black matter is divine consciousness. Or at least she wanted you to talk about black matter and divine consciousness. Another person wanted to know about vitamin D and how does vitamin D help us, and how do we increase our intake of vitamin D? Um, and here's another one: love you for who you are. Talking about you, brother Moore.
Yeah.
There's quite a few, but I don't want to just lay them all out there right now. I
Okay.
want you to deal with
All
those,
right.
and then I'll ask some more.
Okay. Well, let's do the black matter and divine consciousness. I don't know if it was dark matter or black matter.
Dark
Because
matter.
okay, because we could really flow with either one of them, dark or black. Because we say black, we just may be thinking about I don't know, pigment. If we say dark, that's maybe the Europeans' negative connotation with something they don't understand that they can't see. So for us, we just look at it as a, a way of saying when you reach that state of divine universal consciousness, it's not just a darkness, but it's a place where people are all in the same level of thinking. Well, you can't get there without meditation. You can't get there without having a certain mindset, a way of thinking. And so, why we are all now being bombarded with this negative news about what's going on in the world with this pandemic, we're bombarded with that negative information, and that generates fear. So, by not tuning in to the divine principles of who we are, I mean, really, we are true manifestations of what God should be. So if you can't elevate to that stage because you're not thinking about your potential, there's no way you can, again, conceptualize what we mean by dark matter and black matter. The whole universe is more dark matter than there is in the stars that you see. It's what's organizing things. On a celestial level, astrophysics, they talk about dark energy also. So the universe is actually expanding. It expands and it retreats. It's been doing that for 13 billion years. So the dark energies, they say, is that force that does that, but the dark matter keeps things together. These are all still conceptualizations, but if we speak of the microcosm and the macrocosm, mentally with us as people, it's about tuning into that. We may be able to astroplane and go other places like we used to do in the past. So that's the divine consciousness question. The vitamin D one is important. Why? Because it's not a vitamin, it's a steroid hormone. These North Carolina professors, Stump and Privet, called it sotriol, and I like to call it sotriol also. So this particular chemical, sotriol, actually helps establish our bodies to be healthy during challenging times, meaning that when the sun is shining, it creates the vitamin D from the skin. That's where the vitamin D is primarily coming from. It can be fortified in foods. It can be found in some certain food items, but the majority of the vitamin D you're getting is from the sun. So this steroid hormone is generated, has an impact on your cellular groups. You got receptors not just in your bones and your kidneys and your liver, but also in your brain. I talked about that in both Dark Matters, Dark Secrets, and Pigment Power. How you have receptors in the brain that are responding to different types of different types of this steroid hormone. So how do you get more? You have to get outside. This isolation during the pandemic, where we're all stuck inside, has made people even more sick. You have to take some supplements. I definitely recommend the supplements. My levels are about 30 nanograms. Last time I had it tested was 38 nanograms per milliliter. That's on the low end. I'm outside. I play tennis a lot. I live in the South where I'm outside a lot. So those people who are in other areas, like I spoke to my UK friends in United Kingdom, and They don't get a chance to get out. They may have 4 or 5 days of summer, and that's it. That's problematic. So therefore, that's why we may have a lot of illnesses within our community, because we don't get the proper vitamin D. It contributes to having cancer problems, breast cancer for women, men, prostate cancer. There's also this vitamin D folate hypothesis. So vitamin D is supposed to be important, but because of nature and changes, like moving from the equator up to places that are really cold where the people's pigmentation changes, vitamin D becomes different. So white people may be able to absorb more of the sunlight to make the vitamin D because they don't have the pigment blocking it. But in those environments that they were living in, it's hard to reproduce where it's cold. It's hard to reproduce where it's ice age. So the body must adjust to make sure there's some factors to allow reproduction. And so folic acid, which you've probably heard of, folic acid is important for reproduction and fetal development. So the vitamin D may then be lessened to allow the folic acid to be to work to help out with reproduction. And in that context, that's why now there's some concerns about this experimental concoction that people are taking. They say for women, it's altering their menstrual cycles, and for some men, it may have an impact on sperm and motility. And the data and the research is there. I can provide it for your audience at some other point, but you definitely have to get outside. And if you can't get outside, definitely take some supplements for Sotriol or vitamin D.
You know, you have lifted up so many critical questions. And that is, they are making robots with melanin, and melanin is the key to. Is this real melanin? I mean, when can you make artificial melanin?
Yeah, it'd be scientifically investigated, and that's why there's in my book Pigment Power I talk about graphene oxide. What is graphene? They say it's like the most toughest material. It's on the nanoscale level, but the toughest material, tougher than steel. Well, some people are saying that that's in some of those concoctions that are being given to people. Graphene is really melanin. It's in the laboratory created, but it's functioning just like melanin. It's supposed to be associated with having fast conductivity. So using that in robots or using that in nanotechnology explains why it's used in the capacity to transfer energy, just like natural melanin does. So yes, it can be created in the lab, and graphene oxide is one of the controversies that people are saying is in some of these concoctions today.
So if they're making robots with melanin, what is the possibility of them actually thinking?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's a movie called Ex Machina. If you've ever seen that, this fella created a robot, a real robot, and the person, it looked just like a human and functioned like a human, but did it have emotions? So the movie was played to test the emotional state of this robot to see if it really had emotions, and the robot eventually manipulated one of the characters and got out. So do they have emotion? Probably not, but there is some concern right now about artificial intelligence and where are we going with artificial intelligence. It's a dangerous game. And so people have played with this technology, and right now the technology is pretty much driving us, and that's why some people don't have any jobs. Robots have taken over your jobs, but we can't say they have emotions. So it's a very slippery slope right now in terms of where we're going in technology.
Well, let me ask you this, because many people will want your book to get what you're talking about, and since I had some difficulty in sharing the screen, I'm going to ask you, will you come back? Because I'm going to correct this. Will you come back so you can show these?
Okay.
So we can get the shared screen working correctly.
Okay.
And if so, can you give us maybe a date so everybody who could not see the screen can tune in?
Okay.
I want to thank you, man. I really appreciate you. So, how can people get in contact with you? How can they get your books? How can they get your work?
Okay. Can you see my screen right there?
Yeah, I can see it, but for
Okay.
some reason they can't see it.
Oh, you serious? They couldn't see none of those images?
No. That's why I
Oh,
want you to come back, because we have to do this again so that they can see the images.
oh no, they were supposed to see the images.
I know
Hmm.
we got to do this again, brother boy. Uh,
Mm,
if I hadn't known you so long, I would not put some weight on you. But since I've been knowing you for about 40
mhm.
years, 30
Yeah.
years, I'm going to say, yeah, please come back
Okay.
so we can show the screen.
Oh, that's not good. So there's not even on the tape. You can't see it. I thought you said you saw it.
I can, but for some reason it doesn't come up. It
Okay.
remains, you know, uh,
Okay.
in a
Sure.
little
I'll be
box.
back. I'll be
Yeah,
back. You see my baobab tree, right?
yeah, I see it.
Yeah. So that's the baobab tree. I was showing you with that melanin inside the skin. That's too bad you didn't see those images, but we'll get it straight. Show up next time then.
Yeah, okay. Now, if people want to get in contact or buy your book, how do they do that?
Yeah. So www.drtmore.com. So this www.drtmore.com, like drtmore.com. I have created, along with a colleague, something called the melanininstitute.org. So melanininstitute.org. If you explore that, you can see some future endeavors that we're going to do to have some classes. Right now, the post office is really, really, really messed up this world. I sent a package last Friday to go to California from the southern part of the United States. Hasn't gotten there yet. So they have messed up the mail. So hopefully, if there's any needs that you may have, I'll find some other mechanisms to get the books to you. And maybe I send some up to you if they're in where you may be. If you have a clientele and group that comes by, they'll have easy access to the books.
No, that's great. We can work out something with that.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask everybody to subscribe, hit the like button so we can keep you informed. And Brother Moore is going to come back, and I guarantee you this glitch will not happen. This is some of the most critical knowledge for us right now in our defense against the attack on not just black folk, but I would say on the human species as all the earth as we know it, because things are changing, but they're
Yeah.
not. Is it changing for better? Are we creating a more just and balanced and harmonious society? Are we creating something that a handful of people will be able to control the masses of the earth? Kind of like a class system, but without black folk. I remember some years ago there was a headline on Essence magazine that said that 300,000 black people go missing every year without a trace. Do you remember seeing that magazine? It was
Hmm.
Essence. It was the headline. 300, I think it was 350,000 go missing without a trace. And I was wondering, was that a part of the melanin experience? Just before you make the melanin, you've got to have melanin and a lot of it to experiment with, so that you can ultimately reproduce it synthetically.
Right. Well, you're conceptualizing something that maybe some people aren't paying attention to, but they're in a little place in Georgia called Valdosta. There's a gentleman, a young student, that was found wrapped up in the mat, in the a wrestling mat.
I
You hear about that
remember
story? Yeah. So what was going on there? I mean, his organs were missing. That's contemporary times. So in terms of those other bodies that are missing and what has happened, this whole organ transplant, organ donors, and getting cellular groups from people who may be much more, I don't know, enhanced. That could be going on. We know about the whole HeLa cells, all right? You know about Henrietta Lacks and her cells.
Correct.
So there's something going on where people may be studying and you're not studying yourself. That's why these are, as you just said, dangerous times. But that young fellow whose body was wrapped up in a mat and the investigation was not done properly, had his organs missing, and they just say it's just a casual death. I don't know what they said was the cause of death, but that's like a temporary issue. Again, something going away from the white woman syndrome. You know about if there's a white woman missing, and everybody's all up in arms. That happened a few weeks ago. But if it's somebody that is a pigmented, not too much of a concern. So we have to change the world and how we're seeing it, and we can do that one video at a time.
Thank you. All right, Brother Owens, I'm gonna let you go. I'm anxious. I'm dying to have you back, and we correct this problem for the day.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody who listened. I hope you got something from the dialogue and seeing Brother Moore. I did, and I know you did as well. So we look forward to our next session. Have a good day. Peace.
Okay. Peace.